Hello there, and welcome to Successfully Depressed. And I'm your host, Kerry Finsand. This show is all about helping solopreneurs navigate mental and physical health. Today's guest is Alex Kurnellas. Alex Kurnellas grew up working weekends and summers in his dad's diner in Trenton, New Jersey. Through college, he worked as a server, bartender, cook, and restaurant manager, all while dreaming of getting a real job. When Alex graduated, he started an 11-year career as a professional business writer, which he eventually despised. So Alex and his wife opened up Imperial Bottle Shop and Taproom in 2013. And Imperial was named one of Draft Magazine's top 100 best craft beer bars in the U.S. in 2014 and 15, and has recently won the 2020 Oregon Beers Award for Best Pivot. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you, Kerry. Thanks for having me.
Well, your bio there kind of tells a story of you've been in the hospitality business for a long time, so you understand the rat race it is.
Absolutely. It was definitely something I was born into. You know, my grandfather was a Greek immigrant, and, he owned a Greek boxcar diner in the Bronx in the 50s and 60s, and my dad owned an all-night diner in Trenton, New Jersey. He opened over 10 restaurants when I was a kid. And so I was always sort of involved in that process, and working at my dad's restaurants as a busboy or a dishwasher or something when I was younger was, it was like free babysitting for my parents. They could just sort of put me there, have me work, and they knew I would be staying out of trouble.
Yeah, that's the thing with the family business. If you have a larger family, lots of kids, let's say it makes for cheaper labor.
Certainly. It was a good deal for me. I mean, I made, very little amount of money under the table for my dad. But, when you're a young kid, it's more money than any other kid has. So I felt like I was, rolling big with my, couple dollars an hour that I would make.
But I guess growing up in that, you started learning, the ins and outs of the business and what it takes. And I'm not sure how hands-on either your father, your grandfather, they were in their businesses. Were they very hands-on and just doing everything?
Absolutely. My dad, growing up working for my grandfather, when he would work at his diner, he was the cook and the server. You'd walk in, he would take your order and then go behind the counter, cook your food and serve it. And my dad kind of wanted the same for me. My dad is pretty hands-on with his businesses. And so as I was younger, he really wanted to teach me a lot of the things about front of the house, back of the house. As we opened Imperial, I remember my wife saying like, "Oh, how do you know all this stuff?" And a lot of it wasn't even stuff that was necessarily taught to me by my father, but just, I picked up by observing.
Yeah, I think that's great about that is that I guess whether you liked it or not, you got to be either an intern or his apprentice or however you want to look at it, but you were able to learn the fundamental business skills, which then you could apply to a place like a bottle shop, which I didn't know that about you, that you had that background. Cause a lot of people obviously start something in the hospitality industry, a restaurant or a bar. Cause like, oh, this just be so much fun and so cool. And people ask me all the time, how come you haven't started a brewery or a beer bar, especially when I was in that world all the time? And I was like, that's a different beast. Like I could be part of a team, but I don't know the ins and outs of the front of the house, the back of the house. I want to do the marketing and beer sampling. That's it.
Yeah, it's funny. It's something that you mentioned it sort of earlier in my bio, how I talked about, when I was working in college where I always wanted a real job. And to me, that meant some sort of career where I was in an office and things like that. I think a lot of people think about jobs in the service industry and they kind of take them for granted, really. A lot of people who don't work in the service industry can just, have this dream or idea that they want to open up a restaurant or a bar or a brewery or even something small like a bottle shop. And it's a lot more involved than you would really think. I mean, even working within, restaurants nearly my whole life, I remember a lot of times there would even be, a manager who's there that does a lot of the work on premise and they're not happy, they're disgruntled and I'm going to quit. And, this place will be screwed without me. And you're like, well, no, not really, because there's a lot more as an owner, even on top of just the day-to-day management of a place. So it's not as easy as you think, basically.
I guess there's two ways you can look at that. One, there could be truth to that, and maybe their employer is tough to work with, and they truly are. And then there's other way where it's probably not a good business. It's definitely not a good business if they're that key and there's not the processes in place. And that's what I've learned a lot in working at startups and other businesses. Is just you go in and the lack of processes. Someone leaves a position, you're kind of out of luck because there's no playbook or anything.
Yeah. I mean, back in more of my my corporate world when I was trained to do some supervising and management and stuff like that, one of the things that I was always told was a really good sign of a good boss is that their replacement is right underneath them. They're training the people beneath them and showing them the way. That's something I've always known too, that is something that a lot of people who are successful and getting promoted within a system, you can't get promoted unless your replacement's there. It's pointless in a corporate environment. If you promote one person and you don't have a replacement, then you're still having to hire and train a position. So it's not really a beneficial thing to the company.
Yeah, and you want people to grow in the company. If you don't want people to grow in the company, then it's not a good place to work, and you don't have the right mindset. And I know for me out of college, I tried to get into dental equipment sales, and it was a really competitive marketplace. And they said, you should go work for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. So I did. And because they had a great training program, and it really was, and you kind of work your way up through the system, and you have mentors and all that kind of stuff. Shout out to all those Enterprise Rent-A-Car people. We'll pick you up.
Yeah.
So then over time, you became this technical writer. Tell me a little bit about what that was, and what projects did you work on?
Well, it was certainly an interesting career that I had. It started out sort of very entry level, actually. This is down in Santa Barbara. I graduated from UC Santa Barbara, 2004, if I'm remembering correctly. And there was sort of a slight recession at the time and a lot of unemployment. And so I kind of had a hard time finding a job. I mean, when you graduate with a English lit degree, there's limitations there. So I ended up getting my first just sort of, office desk job type of thing, doing just basic administrative work at this company because I had seen them hiring a writer, and they actually had just hired a writer by the time they came in. And I ended up just taking a random job because I had to take a job. I wasn't writing at first. My boss was writing some, SOPs, standard operating procedures for this chemical manufacturing plant within sort of quality assurance. So it's like writing out procedures to standardize things. One day, she knew I was an English major and handed me something, an SOP that she wrote and asked me to proofread it. And I handed it back with just like tons of red writing on it. And then slowly over time, she just kind of started having me do her writing for her without even really telling her bosses. And then I actually got moved out of that job and out from under her. And when I moved out from under her, they noticed, all of a sudden the writing wasn't as good. And so then they hired me as a writer because she was like, oh, well, he's been writing these. And so they hired me as a writer.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. You got recognized.
I did. So I started off writing standard operating procedures in this company. And then I had to proofread a bunch of their product profiles with some marketing documents. And I sort of did the same thing. I actually ended up like revamping their entire format and stuff for the marketing department. So they hired me part-time too. And slowly, I spent 7 years at my first job, and slowly but surely, I just started taking over more and more writing responsibilities. And then pretty much I was in charge of all, and then I had, I was made a supervisor. I had employees. I was in charge of almost all the writing. And then I was also running meetings. I was running product design and scaling up meetings. And I wasn't writing anymore at all. And I had all these responsibilities, and my salary didn't really increase to reflect that, of course. I sort of worked that job for years and years without a promotion and got tired of it. So just quit out of nowhere and moved to Portland. And then in Portland, I got a similar job. I worked for a civil engineering and environmental consulting company. And again, I started off just writing entirely marketing and communications. It was an international engineering firm. So there were certain fun things about working there. But then again, eventually I just started taking on more responsibilities and spending half my day in meetings. And, it was totally sort of a TPS report type of situation where I had like 8 bosses where if I did one thing wrong, I'd hear about it from 8 different people.
I've been there with maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah. Well, it was basically, anyone with a VP in their title was my boss. So, and I would have to write, one thing that I would write would have to get approved by 8 different people. And with all sort of different competing objectives. And so it was a little frustrating. And
it was time to move on.
Yeah.
So when did this idea of creating an Imperial Bottle Shop and beer bar, when was that?
It really started, I moved to Portland in 2010. I started, frequenting some other beer bars, bottle shops. We used to go to Bridgetown. We used to live in North Portland, so it's like Bridgetown, Saravesa, Hop and Vine. And, I really started getting, again, sick of sort of the corporate world and sort of longing for this more simplicity and sort of, working with the general public and having sort of a defined space of where your work was. I never really wanted to enter the restaurant world because I knew how much time and stress that added to my father's life. And it actually really, really affected sort of how my father could parent me when I was younger. He was always busy, he'd be working on birthdays, things like that. And I really didn't want that. And I didn't want to have to manage a kitchen and a front of house staff and all this. And so I saw this, bottle shop sort of tap room model as this really sort of simplified, narrowed down sort of version of operating a restaurant. So it became, really attractive to me in terms of, the startup costs were low, overhead costs were low, things like that. I sort of made the mistake of thinking like, oh, it's going to be really easy to operate this place. But certainly there's even more complications than I thought initially.
Yeah, no, I mean, there always are. It always takes more time and more money. And now from the idea of concept to actually the day that you first launched, how long did that take you to do that?
Like 8 or 9 months. I wrote the business plan. I had, a long Thanksgiving Day weekend for my job off. And so I wrote my business plan over that Thanksgiving weekend. And in 2 days, I wrote up a really long business business plan, basically. And so, yeah, that was in Thanksgiving. And then I worked on finding, funding and stuff like that through the year and planning. And I think I signed a lease in like April or May of that year. So it was a pretty quick turnaround.
Well, being on Southeast Portland Division Street, that street's changed so much, and especially since you've been there. And it used to be a street where I live close to like North William Street in Portland, and that's totally changed. And Division Street, it just popped up with all these new places, and it became this amazing kind of mecca for restaurants and bars and just kind of people hanging out and stuff. So I think that was, a good kind of up and coming location. Being passionate with craft beer, one thing that was important to you was to curate a very good tap list. I think I was reading an interview you did with mutual friend Andy Pruitt, who writes for Lambert Week, about pivoting your business and everything. And that article you were talking about, driving out to the gorge and getting Double Mountains Fresh Hop red and green, but because back then there wasn't many Fresh Hop beers. So you brought in some unique things, and it kind of started building that culture. So tell me a little bit about with your kind of marketing, your kind of concept, this place of how you kind of build up the culture of what your business is.
Yeah, I'd like that you use the word culture because, it's something that I've always sort of, really focused on too with my business is about that culture that we have. When we opened in 2013, craft beer certainly wasn't quite as big as it was now. But I certainly didn't feel like there was necessarily a need for another bottle shop and tap room at that time. In fact, opening in the Southeast, I was really, really sensitive to how close, and was almost didn't move into my location because of how close it is to beer mongers and Belmont Station in particular. But sort of the one thing that, we really wanted to do and we really wanted to start off with, and, again, I opened it with my wife, Sean. And one of the things that was really sort of important to us is that, craft beer in 2013 was still slightly esoteric in a way, where, if you get a person that doesn't know about beer and, they walk into, a bottle shop and they don't know what a wit is or whatever is, they don't need to get necessarily someone rolling their eyes at them. And that's really kind of where we saw that niche of really making that bottle shop and tap room and really making it welcoming to everyone. We also saw, a lot of bottle shops in craft beer world really dominated by, male, it's being a very sort of male centric, being a very sort of white male heterosexual centric business. We really, really wanted to open it up and be more friendly to everyone, to have them feel more welcome. So that's something that my wife and I, worked on, a good amount as we opened our business.
I think one thing that works with your business in a lot of places that build the right culture is if you're in a good neighborhood and you build an inviting culture, then people will support it. And it's really important to have that that kind of local sense of, you walk into the bar and it's oh, Norm, everyone cheers, everyone knows you. And it's nice to have that feeling. And nowadays it's much harder to have that because there's so many different places to go to, but it's, I think, more than ever important now to kind of support a local place that's been there for a while, not just have that sort of attention span and, oh, look at this hot newness, and then move on to the next thing. And that's, unfortunately, as we both know, and as someone that was in the craft beer world for a long time professionally, and now just as a consumer, it became just like, ooh, look what I can do, and that's not a long-term business strategy. So that kind of leads me into, with your business, you've tried a lot of different things out, and during the pandemic, the one thing that I always tried to encourage you with and appreciated was the fun things you would do, especially at your the previous location when you had your Imperial Bottle Shop on Alberta, because that's fairly close to my house. During COVID, you kind of came up with this idea, let's do this glue bar, which is this concept of warm spice ciders and wines and beers and creative cocktails and things like that. So can you kind of talk about kind of just trying these different kind of creative ideas out, and kind of what's your process of coming with these ideas, and actually how do you choose which ones to kind of bring to fruition?
Ooh, that's a good question. In terms of the creativity, I mean, a lot of things that have been, that drive my creativity are, this isn't very exciting, but a lot of it has to do with necessity and available resources. Through the pandemic, obviously there was, necessity of making money and things like that, and keeping our business alive and keeping people coming through the doors. But again, because money was so tight and there were so many different supply issues, working with the resources that you really have was sort of, really, really important to me, basically. With the glue bar, what happened with that basically is we had a second lockdown. Basically, it was 2020. Things had started to sort of get a little normal towards the end of that summer, and then we had those fires with the smoke, and then we had a pretty mellow fall, and then you have another sort of surge. I believe that was the Delta surge, maybe. I think that happened towards the end of 2020. So we had another lockdown. They told us we were going to be locked down for a month, and then after 2 weeks, they said, oh, no, we're going to open again. But there was no inside dining allowed. And that was just pretty killer through the winter, obviously. And what happened basically is, we reopened for the holidays and right after Thanksgiving, and it was just slow. Nobody really wanted to be outside in the cold. It was just completely kind of dead at the business one night when I was bartending. And so I just decided to mull some cider. I heated up some cider and I blasted music out the front. And I actually just went out there and was dancing and talking to people on the street and sold some hot cider. And the street was pretty barren and there was nothing going on. And I ended up getting a crowd of, maybe 7-8 people drinking at the end of the night and just listening to music, and a little dance party broke out. And and so I basically, started thinking about how to, integrate hot drinks. If people were going to be outside instead of, really trying to warm the entire outside area, give them something warm to put into their bodies instead. And I did have at the time this massive cellar of strong barrel-aged beers and barrel-aged sours and, really high quality beers, but, they didn't really sell as much as they used to a couple of years ago. I just sort of started putting these ideas together and, with glue wine in particular, it's something that I had heard about from, I had never even really had it, in Europe when I had traveled there. It was something that I'd only heard about from friends traveling in Europe, friends skiing in Europe, friends who had done, study abroad in Europe, where they talk about glue wine as this magical thing. It's this warm, spiced wine, and, you drink it in these magical environments, at the ski lodge outside, at the slopes, or at a Christmas market in Germany. And it just had this thing that resonated with people and carried with people. And So it all just kind of added up to where I could open this little tiny glue bar thing. Something that you mentioned was how short of attention span people have these days, in terms of, people always want to run to the new place and they forget about the old places. I call it the Instagram story lifestyle, basically, where something's around for 15 seconds and then it disappears in 24 hours and people move on to the next thing. And sort of absorbing that too, instead of just trying to sell drinks at my bar, I completely rebranded it and launched it as, being this new bar, this glue bar, this pop-up. And it was interesting. I mean, just sort of that marketing and having its own Facebook page and Instagram page and its own logo. And, there were people that were coming to the bar and didn't even know Imperial existed and just thought it was Glue Bar. So I've done that a couple times now in terms of essentially opening up what are kind of like fake pop-ups, where I'm doing just kind of something different with my business and I'll just remarket it.
What I liked about that was, I definitely was all about, supporting local businesses, and you did a good job actually, packaging everything together. And I like that smart that you got these beers from the cellar and kind of put them out there and said, hey, it's wintertime and stuff. But what I liked about it was, for me, it was an experience. And that's what more nowadays, especially the typical craft beer drinker, you kind of have to give them more of an experience to get them excited. So it was something unique. You had covered heated area, and you had Christmas music and lights, and it just had a good vibe. And like you said, kind of like those winter markets in Europe and everything. Yeah. So that was cool. So you did that, and then you reinvented it again and made the fizz bar.
Yeah, necessarily it wasn't quite as popular as the glue bar. But with Glue Bar, basically, one of the things we did was sort of capture a new audience. One of the things, like you mentioned, it was sort of about, the whole experience. And that's something actually that I've always really focused on, is the experience, the customer experience, which I think particularly in craft beer world is really important these days, because, when I opened, 9 years ago in 2013, just being a craft beer taproom bottle shop was unique enough to bring people in. Since then, craft beer has become sort of grossly oversaturated, particularly in Portland, and especially with tap rooms. There seems to be, a tap room in every neighborhood, if not more than one. And subsequently, every tap room is going to go and curate a good tap list, hopefully. It's pretty hard not to have a good tap list now with so much great beer out there. So really it's the friendliness of your servers, your environment, that overall experience, like you mentioned. So with Glue Bar, we were really intentional about that. Like you said, we put out a bunch of feel-good music, Christmas music, we had lights, things like that, created this experience. We really, like I said, captured this sort of new audience of people that were more interested in wine and sort of other things. And so, headed into, spring, summer, obviously hot drinks weren't going to be too popular. So, we really wanted to look at how we could capture that and what we could do. So we came up with Fizz, which was, sort of a champagne cocktail bar where we were using lots of sort of fun, different ingredients with the cocktails. And again, that would capture that sort of, second audience and bring them into the bar and just provide sort of another sort of unique, fun offering.
Yeah, and that trend of sparkling beverages with alcohol in them has become very popular, obviously, especially to the kind of the 20 and 30-year-olds, let's say, and craft beer is not quite as popular to them, at least in what I've seen. The industry has changed as well. You can get beer at grocery stores have their, in Oregon, we're very unique for that. Everywhere you can think of, there's a place to get a beer. So that's more competition there. And then you obviously got breweries open up their own satellite tap rooms. So just more places to go to. But a place like you, that's where that culture, having kind of unique events is very important. I know you've had some with Portland Beer Week, the New School, New Brewery Showcase happened there last month. Things like that brings people in that oh, this is kind of a fun idea. And then also makes it kind of fun for the regulars. Then I also know
Oh,
another thing
yeah.
you did was the bagel pop-up. I checked that out too. So, you always try to support the hustle there. You've learned a lot from that. You've tried lots of different things out. And
Yeah.
I found a quote that I wanted to
Okay.
share with you from Thomas Edison. I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways that won't work. So I think that's very true. And I know in my own career, there's been many times of failure with tap lister, too many ups and downs and stuff. Speaking of ups and downs, when I was in a closed tap lister down, then I ended up getting a lot of people in the community who wanted to help out in the ways they can. Then I ended up selling a majority of somebody else, and I worked with them for a while. So it turned out to be a good thing for a number of years. Now it's gone, rest its soul, but it had its day. For you, obviously the pandemic, like a lot of people, was very difficult. There's this, collective trauma, especially for business owners who don't have a steady paycheck to go to, or, a sounding board. For kind of your own mental health during those times, who is your sounding board? Who did you talk to kind of work through ideas, or just work through challenges that you had or frustration?
Yeah, my pandemic situation was slightly unique in that, as you know, my wife, Sean, had cancer before the pandemic. So, 2018, 2019, she was very ill, and then, recovering. And so those years were really, really trying on me, more so than the pandemic years. Then, we hit pandemic as well. So in terms of, for one, especially talking about mental health, for one thing, I'm sort of a stubbornly independent person. In terms of mental health issues, I had suffered from depression and anxiety from the time I was 12. Basically, when I was 12, my mom got in an accident and she became mentally handicapped. And, my father left us. And, from the time I was 12 through my adolescence into my adulthood, I was very much on my own in terms of emotional support, mental support, things like that. When I was 12 and on my own, there was no one there to, send me to a therapist or anything like that. So through my wife's cancer, one of the things that, I really relied on for mental health was actually physical exercise. You saw me, I think in that first year, I lost about 100 pounds. But that was something that kept me very stable. I was able to establish a really good, every morning I'd wake up and, I'd exercise for 45 minutes, an hour, and that would start my day. I was eating very healthy. I wasn't drinking very much. I was staying pretty focused, and that helped me out a lot through those years. And then eventually, the pandemic happened, and actually about literally a month before the pandemic started seeing a therapist. And so she really was sounding board for a lot of, my frustrations and sort of more emotional and mental issues. And then in terms of, more of my creative side, I run a lot of ideas by my wife. And, I don't always take her advice. She can be a little bit more critical of my ideas or think my ideas are crazy or whatever. Typically, when she thinks my ideas are crazy, I know that those are my best ideas. And then, the ideas where she offers more like direct criticism on, I can, I know like, oh, maybe this is sort of bad. But yeah, a lot of what I've worked on with my therapist and sort of what I do anyway is, not take failure too harshly. It's kind of, I always try to look at failure as an opportunity for success or a learning experience. And sometimes it's just not at all, too. And you just have to accept that and move on from it. But then the other thing that I really concentrate on is not worrying too much about the things that you can't control and really focusing on the things that you can control. In terms of my failures over the last years or lack of success, no matter how you want to look at it, I've really had to focus on not getting frustrated that, my wife had cancer, and not feeling like a victim or sorry for myself, but, using it as motivation to exercise more, get healthy and focus on my business. And, in terms of, the pandemic, again, like every other day, there was something happening that was out of our control with regulations or, people just acting like people. So, again, that was something I really focused on. I said, what do I have control over, and really focusing on and going after those things and believing in myself and having that confidence. That was something that very early on in the pandemic, I was throwing a lot of things at the wall, trying to see what stick. And, after, a few months of it, I really started to gain confidence in terms of, seeing myself and seeing my work ethic and my creativity and sort of my push and feeling confident that if I just kept on believing in myself and working hard, that things would work out.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you sharing your story and your mental health challenges. It's not easy. And that's something that this year, I didn't know how in the beginning of the year, I wanted to share my struggles with mental health. And then this podcast kind of emerged from that. So, it's all about sharing stories with my stories and hearing other people's stories and, finding ways that we can help each other out. So I appreciate that. I want to say, well, first of all, it's awesome that Sean, your wife, is doing great now. That is,
yes, it does.
Sweet. That makes life much easier. So that helps. The other thing I like is that, the sounding board with your spouse, it doesn't always work for some people, but for me, it works quite well. I'm definitely that kind of guy that is that idea guy. And a lot of times I'm like, this is it. But a lot of times I'm just like, let's maybe just sleep on that first and stuff. So I think it's good to have that as advice. And it also can be hard she might give me great advice, but someone else will give me that advice and it makes sense. And she's like, I told you that 10 times. And I'm like, well, it's weird because it came from you, which, nothing against you. You're great. But for some reason in my mind, how it processed, from other people. And that's just how it works for a lot of us and everything. I do remember watching you on Facebook, getting out there running, doing different things and losing all that weight. Cause that obviously that helps with everything, like getting healthier and stuff. So physical fitness is great for that. Another thing I wanted to bring up is some other things you talked about where, during the pandemic, this terrible thing happened to everybody and caused more anxiety and caused issues. I have a lot of friends, hospitality industry or fitness industry that lost their business or their sales are way down. So they're trying to pivot. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty tough to be in a space where it's not your fault and there's not a lot you can do with it. So it sounds like something that might have helped you with that process was obviously there's counseling and talking to other people. But I think your mindset of that kind of technical writer and creating these processes, that probably helped you. Do you think that helped you out?
Absolutely. One of the things that I learned early in school when it came to writing was that it's kind of not necessarily important how you write. A lot of people when they're writing concentrate on the words they're using and they want it to sound pretty or intelligent and use big words or whatever. But really it's concentrating on what you're writing, which is more important. Really early, basically I had a professor very early tell me that, War and Peace is considered to be, one of the greatest, if not the greatest novel ever written. Well, it's been translated into 50 languages and it's still an amazing book in every language, even though the words aren't the same, because the content is really good. The plot, the characters, it's not how you're describing something, it's what you're describing. So as a writer, I've always spent more time on my research and planning, having the information and the basis there. And so I think that, I carried that into life as well, basically. When you put that time in to do the planning and the research and to put that structure behind it, the process, like you said, behind it before you start doing that actual process, I think it's just, really invaluable, especially in business world and through COVID. You're having to churn out a lot of things and react really quickly. But I think it was almost more important to stop for a second, not knee-jerk react to every little change and to actually stop and come up with a process and a plan and to think things out in advance before. So that's something that has been very valuable to me. Imperial, when we opened, we really hit the ground running. We were sort of instantly busy. And a lot of that was how much planning I put into the business. I mean, like I said, my business plan was, I think, 40 or 50 pages long. I mean, it was a lot. You know, my wife and I, before we opened Imperial, we went around to all the different bottle shops, tap rooms, breweries, and we would sit there for 2 hours at different days, at different times of the day, and we'd play Yahtzee, and I'd sit there and actually record every sale that was made. And so I was able to predict, sales pretty accurately and things like that. I mean, it was, I
Oh,
put a
wow.
lot of work
That's
into it. And,
interesting.
all the time it's, it cracks me up. I'll have people contact me saying, oh, I want to open a bottle shop tap room. Can you tell me this information? It's like, no, I'm not going to tell you that information unless you pay me, because I spent hours and hours figuring out that information on my own when I opened my business.
Yeah, it's where you kind of give them kind of the high levels, like, this is what I would do, do, like you said, do your research. It's kind of the common sense thing. And, but not everyone does a business plan. And what I like to do is do a 1-page business plan, at least a starting point, because you can really kind of break things down and at least you have a place to work from. Because 50-page business plan, like definitely all the numbers are so important. And over the years, I've gotten better at the numbers, but still that's harder for me to really focus on. I like kind of the sales and the marketing and the creation of the concept and everything. But a detailed plan like that makes a lot of sense. And that helps a business be more successful if you have some data to work off of.
We're just coming up on our 9-year anniversary. And I think one of the best reasons to have some form of business plan, at least, is as you go in time, a business plan isn't just to open your business. Really, you should go back and revisit it every couple of years, see how you're meeting your objectives, what you want to adjust. I just recently, we closed our second location, our Alberta location. And so I've been sitting down and trying to figure out sort of, what I want to do more with my time. And one of the things I did was revisit that original business plan. And so I'm making adjustments at Imperial to realign us to some of our initial objectives and to even sort of push those a little bit further now too.
Well, that's a great segue and something that we kind of touched on a little bit before, but to kind of get back into is obviously closing down the Alberta location. And before I had to get my product placement bottle here. So there's a nice little product placement for your bottle shop. But anyways, making the decision to close a business is so difficult. To close a location is so difficult, but it's so necessary in certain circumstances.
Yeah.
Especially if things aren't working there, because you'll start losing more and more money. And even if you have a lease, you have to look at like the long term, like what's going to happen on here. Yeah. Where can we put our resources? Does it make sense to do this thing? So can you tell me about the thought process that you had to kind of to close that location down?
Well, I will say that, for this specific decision, it was slightly pushed on me because the lease was up. Through the opening of that location, my wife got sick right after we opened. We never really had much of a chance to build that business. And then, pandemic started. Once pandemic started, selling the business became really hard. I mean, especially with so many tap rooms having just closed, they had, turnkey places that you could just walk into and open with just a lease, not having to really put much investment in it at all. So, selling and subleasing was a difficult prospect, through there. I mean, easily the hardest part of the whole thing was just sort of accepting sort of the failure and sort of the financial loss of it. And really my only advice would be, it's basically what, sunk cost fallacy. I think a lot of business owners, you have this dream. It's an issue of your pride at a certain point that it's hard to let it go. But yeah, at a certain point, you just have to realize that the costs that you put into it are sunk. Anything more you're going to put into it is just going to possibly dig you into a deeper hole. I think a lot of business owners, go into business because on some level, you do have some sort of ego. You don't necessarily want a boss. You want to be control over your own situation, your own creativity, your own whatever it is. And so I think a lot of people, hang on too long. When I made the decision not to, renew my lease and to close this location, it weighed on me heavily for a few weeks. And pretty quickly, I started becoming excited to close. There's months before I decided and we actually closed, and I sort of got excited for it. And since it's closed, it's been a huge weight off of my shoulders. And and opened up some other opportunities for me. I would say, for any business owner or anyone who's invested in something that they're working in, for years, to really focus on the future and more of what's better than yourself than what you've put into it in the past.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I can see how obviously it's tough to close something down, but then you have you have some relief because you're like, now I have one location to focus on instead of two.
Well, first off, I'm excited to be able to spend more time on it more than anything. And that's both, time with my staff and getting them set up to be able to serve our customers the best. And then also time just there to interact with our customers. We very much did, grow a neighborhood business over the years. And that's sort of really our bread and butter. And so being able to spend time there and see our regular customers is more valuable than anything. We work a lot with our community. We do fundraisers with local schools and different sort of nonprofit organizations. So just being present is something that we're really excited about. Then going back towards my business plan, one of the big things in my business plan, again, was the customer experience. And so we've been working a lot with that, making tweaks, adjustments, sort of modernizing our space in a way almost, or just changing things up a little bit to give it a little bit more of a homey feel. And I'm really excited with this time. I've been able to spend more time on my beer buying in particular. And one thing that I'm really, really excited about is having more time to be able to work with, the small local breweries, getting out there, tasting more beers, working with the small sort of upstart breweries to get them some sort of notoriety and things like that. Supporting the local beer scene was like one of my sort of primary objectives. And then another one of, my big objectives with Imperial was also creating a more environmentally friendly beer experience, and sort of, what would be more referred to as sort of reducing your carbon footprint. And like the bottle that you just held up earlier that was a big part of our initial plan. That was something that didn't actually take off a lot, but we use those liquid beer guns as our taps, and it allows us to fill 16-ounce bottles to go. Now, the idea behind that is that reusing bottles is considerably more environmentally friendly than throwing them out or recycling them. Recycling actually uses a lot of energy. You're shipping, trucking around the cans, actually doing the recycling process, things like that. And so one of the things that a lot of the reasons why that program that I did didn't really work out is because, a lot of times, kind of like what Al Gore said, that a lot of times being environmentally friendly is just inconvenient, and, especially when, the popularity of cans started coming around and more craft beer started getting available in cans. People didn't want to have to carry something to a store to fill it and then to carry it home and remember the bottle or whatever. It's a lot easier to just throw the can in the recycling. Beginning of pandemic, we were delivering, and so basically one of the things that I'm really looking forward to now is actually restarting a delivery service. I'm going to be doing hopefully delivery just specifically with refillable bottles. So if kind of imagine sort of like a milkman but for beer type of situation. And so the idea behind that is that we're really hoping again to reduce people's carbon footprint, take a lot of sort of the can recycling out of the equation, and providing really, really sort of fresh local, hyper local craft beer to people, and delivering it to the door to make it a convenient thing for them. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm also really looking forward to doing things outside of craft beer. Hoping to get Imperial and sort of my craft beer, or at least running the bottle shop down to maybe half my time. And I want to get back into writing as well. And whether that's working in some of the fields that I used to, doing some freelance and contract work, or, looking for new topics. I kind of have some interest into going to doing some beer writing as well. For the last 4 years in between, the life cancer and the pandemic, my life was, dominated by my business and my responsibilities. And, I didn't really have much room for, personal goals or growth. And so I'm really happy just to be sort of having the time to get back to.
Well, it's not like there's a little bit of that kind of full things are coming full circle. You're
Yeah.
getting back into what you used to love to do, which is work with the small brewers and learn about the beers and support them. And then you're getting your business back to where you're getting the systems back in place, everything kind of built up, because of the pandemic, getting things figured out in this new world that we live in. And then you're trying to work towards having that, your baby grow on its own. You're still involved, but then you personally want to start writing. So that sounds like a coming to a very healthy place, from a dark place to a healthy place. And it just kind of took a while to kind of go through that journey.
So through that dark time, I was working a ton, but just, in that time period, really understanding the parts of my work that I really loved, basically, and sticking with those and really sort of just rocking on those things and really concentrating on doing those. And, also recognizing the things that I don't like about my job and subsequently delegating those things to other people. Whether it be outsourcing it to another company, doing, my payroll or my books or doing whatever. Luckily my wife's come back to work. So I really moved away from bartending. For as much as I love working with the general public, I also hate working with the general public. And so, I've learned that, doing that a lot is not good for me. It's not good for my mood and my stress levels. So, I've learned to, instead of working a bunch of bartending hours to save a little bit of cash here and there, just to say, what, I should just pay someone to do this, and I should concentrate on the things that I enjoy more.
Yeah, and that's the hard part is when you're a business owner and it's your baby is for growth. You need to let go at some point of the reins on certain things, and bookkeeping definitely is one of those ones where. For most people, it's not the most fun, sexy thing to do. So maybe that's one of the first ones, but obviously it's very important. I guess I just have a few more questions for you. This is kind of a unique thing I just kind of thought of on the spot as we were talking here to kind of help people out. So 2 questions. One, if someone wanted, I guess, make a case for someone starting their own business, and then make a case for someone.
Starting your own business, it's great. One of the frustrations that I had at my old job, again, as I worked as a writer, and it wasn't the most creative writing, but it's definitely I'm creating something, and having then to have something that I would create and work on, having to get filtered through 8 different people who would approve it and change it, and I might have to modify this and revise that and change that, and then in the end, the writing that I was producing wasn't even mine because it was getting changed so much by the process, and so that's by far, to me, one of the most rewarding things about having a business is just having that complete ownership of something, and that creative freedom. That is, really the most compelling aspect of having the business to me. Another thing for me too is, again, like I said, we work with the general public. There are aspects of that
Agreed.
I love. And, if you are opening a business, you're going to be producing a product or service that is going to make people happy or change their lives in some way. And so, it's easier to imagine with a bar because, we've had people come back and say, we met at your bar 5 years ago and got married, and I'm so thankful that you were here, and things like that. And, we've seen friendships form, people meet, become friends and hang out, and those are really rewarding. But we can see it very obviously, but I think no matter what business you have, the idea that you're improving people's lives with your business, I think is something that's great. A case for not opening your business. Those ones are probably pretty easier. Obviously, I would say the one thing is that, while you have complete ownership, you are also the end line of responsibility. When push comes to shove, when there's no one else there to do something, you're doing it. My wife and I have always likened our business to sort of like having a child. Obviously, it's not quite as intense as a child, but it's there. You have to take care of it. When it cries, you have to give it attention. You don't have a choice or you lose it. So that level of responsibility is tough. And then, by far the other aspect that I've had, and this is something that I think that anyone opening their own business should be mindful of, is having employees. I think a lot of people, when you open a business, you don't think about sort of all the aspects of the business and the responsibilities. For example, I have a cousin that became a dentist, and I know, when she eventually opened her own practice, she didn't, she wanted to just be a dentist. She didn't realize she was going to have to run this business, and so it was a lot. And for me, that's been by far the hardest thing has been the employee thing. When we hired our first full-time employee and he was reliant on our money to pay his rent and things like that, that was a lot of pressure. And through COVID, obviously, employment issues were, extremely stressful. Making sure my employees were taken care of, able to live. Some of them had kids, making sure that their kids were taken care of. You know, the level of responsibility there is going outside of yourself and your business. Now, all of a sudden, you're responsible for other people's lives too. So that was, that's kind of the hardest thing for me.
I think that's a really good point. And something that just pops up to my mind when I took investment in Taplister. Then all of a sudden it got more real because I had to make sure I reported earnings and weekly meetings and making sure, which was very helpful, but at the same time adds more pressure. I want to encourage people to start their own project, their own hustle, whatever it may be, but I also want people to have both sides of it, because I know for me in the past there's this kind of balance, and I'm a resilient person too, but it's that resilience meets burnout. You got to be careful. You got to make sure you're in the right spot, because I've definitely burned myself out for employers as well as for Taplister. Just you go all in or nothing sometimes, and you live and breathe what you're doing and stuff. Where can people find you online?
Our website is www.imperialbottleshop.com. And that's going to provide you just some basic info. We keep an updated tap list and bottle list so people can see what we had in there. And we keep some information on our events and things, different happenings. But also our Facebook page and Instagram page are really the best place to keep up to date. We're at Imperial Bottle Shop on Instagram. And then you can just look up Imperial Bottle Shop and Taproom on Facebook. We keep pretty active on social media. We try to.
Well, again, I want to thank you, Alex Kurnellas, for your time today. Check out Imperial Bottle Shop. You can check out me online at kerryfinsan.com. As I always end the show, I have a little tagline I like to say. Remember, you're not alone in life or business.